Here's the exact text rewritten with no additions or changes. Number 10. The sneeze ordinance. Picture this. You're walking down the street in a very specific part of the American South. You feel a tickle in your nose and a giant, earth-shaking sneeze is coming. You let it rip, maybe a little too loudly, and a stern-looking police officer pulls up, siren blaring. He informs you that you've just committed a crime. A crime? For a sneeze? Yep. Believe it or not, some towns still have old sneeze ordinances on the books. These laws, often dating back to a time when people thought illnesses could spread through the air via sheer force of will, were meant to prevent public outbursts. They often required you to have a handkerchief or a tissue, or to simply contain yourself. Of course, no one is getting arrested for this today. It's a hilarious, archaic law that's a perfect example of what happens when a society tries to legislate away a natural human function. It's a relic of a time when public health and social etiquette were seen as one and the same, and your body's involuntary reflex was considered a public nuisance. It's a good reminder that just because a law is on the books doesn't mean it's based on anything remotely resembling common sense. Number 9. The frog kissing ban. Let's take a trip to the land of fairy tales, where a princess can kiss a frog and turn him into a prince. It's a beautiful, innocent story, right? Well, not in certain American states. Believe it or not, some places still have old laws on the books that literally prohibit the kissing of frogs. The reasoning isn't as poetic as you might think. This isn't a legal crusade against interspecies romance. It's a completely forgotten, yet totally wild, piece of public health legislation. Before we had things like modern medicine and proper food handling regulations, people were concerned about the spread of warts, salmonella, and other diseases from animals to humans. Frogs, with their slimy skin and penchant for hanging out in murky water, were seen as a prime vector for these pathogens. So some legislative body, somewhere, decided the best way to prevent a widespread frog-borne plague was to simply outlaw the act of kissing them. It's a law that sounds like it was written by a grumpy king in a cartoon, but it's a very real piece of legal history that reminds us that our ancestors had some very specific and sometimes very silly fears. Number 8. The unlawful ostrich. Imagine you're a farmer living a simple life, and you decide you want to diversify your livestock. Cows? Too mainstream. Chickens? Boring. How about an ostrich? Majestic, fast, and a great source of enormous eggs. You order one, get it shipped to your farm, and you're a proud new ostrich owner. Then, a city official shows up and slaps you with a fine. Why? Because in some places, owning an ostrich is completely and inexplicably illegal. These laws are often a relic of a time before we had a proper understanding of exotic animals. They were created out of a kind of generalized panic about what could happen if these giant birds, with their powerful legs and surprisingly aggressive personalities, were to escape. The fear was that an escaped ostrich would rampage through the town square, eating all the apples and terrifying the children. The law wasn't created because of a specific incident, but because of a collective what-if that got a little out of hand. It's a good reminder that our laws are often a mirror of our fears, and our ancestors were apparently very, very afraid of giant, feathered birds. Here's the exact text rewritten with no additions or changes. Number 7. The jukebox ban. You and your friends are hanging out in a local cafe. You're talking, laughing, and you decide to put on some tunes to liven up the mood. You head to the jukebox, drop in a coin, and the place is filled with the soulful sounds of a classic rock tune. But then the cafe owner comes over and pulls the plug. Not because of the volume, but because in their town, having a jukebox is a crime. This isn't just a quirky local ordinance. It's a piece of history that speaks to a very specific kind of fear. The fear of teenage rebellion. These laws, often passed in the 1950s and 60s, were a direct response to the rise of rock and roll and the youth culture that came with it. Town councils and concerned parents saw jukeboxes as a direct pipeline to delinquency, loud music, and immoral dancing. They believed that by controlling the music, they could control the youth. It's a hilarious and slightly depressing example of a generation trying to hold back the tide of social change with legal paper, and it's a good reminder that a simple machine that plays music was once seen as a serious threat to the social fabric. Number 6. The illegal snowman. Growing up, Winter was a magical time. Snow days meant no school, and the first thing you did was run outside to build a snowman. You'd roll up 3 big snowballs, find some sticks for arms, and maybe a carrot for a nose. It was a wholesome, innocent activity. But in some towns, building a snowman is a crime. These laws, often found in smaller, more rural communities, are a hilarious testament to a very specific kind of bureaucratic overreach. The reasoning behind them is often tied to things like public safety and traffic ordinances. The idea was that a large snowman built too close to the road could be a visual obstruction for drivers, or that the act of building one could impede pedestrian traffic. Of course, the law was created with the best intentions, but the idea of a police officer pulling over a family for building an oversized Frosty the Snowman is just too funny to ignore. It's a classic example of a simple, harmless activity being entangled in a web of legal red tape, and it's a good reminder that a law's longevity doesn't necessarily correlate with its usefulness. Number 5. The wobbly dance ban. Let's travel back to the early 20th century, a time of flappers, jazz, and a whole lot of moral panic. Society was changing, and a new generation was embracing new forms of music and dance that were deemed unseemly and immoral by the older generation. One of these dances, which involved a lot of shaking and hip swiveling, was seen as a direct threat to the moral fabric of society. So, some towns and cities passed a law literally banning a dance called the wobbly dance. The law was a direct attempt to legislate morality, a desperate effort to curb what was seen as a dangerous and rebellious new trend. It's a hilarious and slightly sad reminder of a time when a simple dance move could be seen as a sign of the apocalypse. It's a good reminder that every generation has its own version of kids these days, and that our fears about new cultural trends often get a little out of hand. Here's the exact text rewritten with no additions or changes. Number 4. The no bathing after dark law. Imagine you've had a long, hard day at work. You're tired, you're covered in dirt, and all you want to do is take a nice, hot bath. You fill the tub, light a few candles, and just as you're about to step in, a neighbor bangs on your door. "You can't do that," they yell. "It's after dark." Believe it or not, some very old laws still exist that prohibit bathing after dark. These laws are a fascinating window into a very specific kind of antiquated fear, the fear of wasting water. In a time before modern plumbing and water conservation, water was a precious resource. It was often hauled by hand from a well or a river, and a full bathtub was seen as a huge waste. So some communities passed laws to curb this behavior, often with specific ordinances about when you could and couldn't bathe. It's a hilarious and slightly absurd law that reminds us that our definition of wasteful has changed dramatically over time, and that a relaxing bath was once seen as a sign of reckless extravagance. Number 3. The unlawful sausage. Let's go back to the days of food-related paranoia. It seems our ancestors were very, very worried about what they were putting in their bodies, and sometimes those fears manifested into some truly bizarre laws. One of these is the unlawful sausage. Yes, in some places, it was once illegal to make, sell, or even possess a sausage under certain conditions. The reasoning behind this wasn't an anti-meat agenda. It was a completely practical, if slightly extreme, public health measure. Before modern refrigeration and food safety standards, ground meat was a prime breeding ground for bacteria. Sausages, with their mystery meat contents and long shelf life, were a particular concern. The fear was that a poorly made or rotting sausage could cause a widespread illness, so some towns simply banned them. It's a hilarious and slightly gross reminder that our current food safety standards are a direct result of our ancestors' very real fears, and that a simple sausage was once a symbol of danger and disease. Number 2. The useless fence. Imagine you're a farmer and you've just built a beautiful, sturdy fence around your property. It's perfect. Tall, straight, and completely secure. But a city official shows up and tells you to tear it down. Why? Because in some places, it's illegal to build a fence that is useless. The law, often a relic of a time when every piece of land was expected to serve a purpose, was a kind of anti-hoarding and anti-aesthetics ordinance. The idea was that if a fence wasn't serving a clear purpose, like containing livestock or marking a property line, It was simply an eyesore and a waste of resources. It's a perfect example of a law that sounds completely absurd today, but was a completely logical, if slightly overzealous, piece of legislation at the time. It's a good reminder that our definition of purposeful has changed dramatically over time, and that a simple fence was once seen as a sign of either progress or pointless extravagance. Number 1. The tainted laughter. Have you ever laughed so hard you cried? It's a joyful, liberating experience that makes you feel alive. But in some places, believe it or not, a law still exists that prohibits loud, tainted, or immoral laughter in public. This isn't a joke. It's a very real and very bizarre piece of legal history that speaks to a very specific kind of fear, the fear of public outbursts and indecency. These laws, often dating back to the Victorian era, were a direct response to a society that was obsessed with public decorum and a sense of proper behavior. The idea was that a person's laughter could be a sign of something much more sinister: drunkenness, indecency, or a general lack of moral fiber. It's a hilarious and slightly terrifying reminder that a simple human expression could once be seen as a criminal offense, and that our ancestors had some very specific and sometimes very silly ideas about what constituted a threat to public order.